Hello, my name is Javier Martin and this is my game called Robotic Rebellion. Imagine a game where the player character must not stop moving to avoid death, while at the same time having their movement mechanic change depending on the objects it is carrying. The view of Robotic Rebellion would be a side-scroller puzzle game for consoles. I chose the side-scroller game because it's the easiest way for the player to interpret how the player character will drop immediately if the impulse button is not pressed. The most famous example of this mechanic is Flappy Bird. Let's talk about the theme. The player will control a hovering robot that works inside of an enormous warehouse for an evil company that has enslaved all of its robots to continuous work and suffering. I chose this theme for two simple reasons. The hovering robot will easily depict the main mechanic in the game, and the dark-filled warehouse will allow for interesting puzzle levels as the player character attempts to escape from perpetual slavery. There are two main anti-forces in the game. The first one is an expanding or shrinking security laser. It will expand if no obstacles are in its way and shrink if there are any. It starts at the top and moves downward. If the robot comes in contact with the laser, the player character will die. The other anti-force is the ground. It will destroy the player character upon contact. Here are the rules of the game. Since the ground is an anti-force, the player must keep pressing the impulse button to avoid dropping and dying. The other rule of the game is to avoid the moving laser. The player can simply get on the other side of an obstacle to protect itself from the laser. In order to progress in the game, the player must pick up objects and place them in the correct order and in the correct sequences. They must also complete the puzzles and exit the level through the door as it opens once the puzzle is completed. Here's a clear example of the actions, goals, and gameplay in Robotic Rebellion. The player will have to use the impulse button to move the robot around an obstacle-filled level, and will need to solve different puzzles by carrying the objects and dropping them into their proper location or attaching objects to other objects. This all must occur while avoiding the laser and not hitting the ground. Once the puzzle is completed, which will be the sub-goal of each level, the exit door will open and will allow the player to escape this level and move on to the next. Let's compare a similar mechanic from another game to mine. In Star Child, the player character drops if impulse is not pressed. As you can see from this video, the main mechanic, though, is not altered when an object is attached to the player character. This is what makes my mechanic different. When carrying a crate, the player will have to press impulse more often, as the downward force will be added. Furthermore, if the player is carrying a rope, the impulse and movement button will have to be pressed and angled more to account for the opposite force that is pulling on the player character. It is this altering movement that sets my mechanic apart from the rest. There are many decisions that will need to be made by the player, which include examining their surroundings, recognizing the timing of the laser anti-force, preventing the player character from hitting the ground, deciphering the puzzles, hiding if the laser is approaching, and understanding the weight added to the movement mechanic when holding on to objects. Failure to decide properly will lead to death. There are two risks associated with my game. The game only has one unique mechanic and will have to be scripted in such a way that it becomes immersive for the player. Another potential risk could be that the puzzles become too repetitive. To add depth to the game, I have made a backup mechanic that would increase the speed of the security laser while alternating the obstacles in the levels, making it more of an obstacle course instead of just a puzzle game. So the Robotic Rebellion awaits. Are you ready to help this little robot get rid of its chains and give it its freedom it is longing for? Let its adventure begin. Thank you very much for your time.